Close your eyes. Forget the roar of tanks, the whistle of bullets, or the deafening blast of falling bombs. Forget maps stained with ink and blood and battles decided by sheer, overwhelming force. Now open your eyes and imagine a battlefield with no soldiers, a skirmish with no visible enemy, a war where not a single shot was fired. Can you believe it? How could such a war exist? And more importantly, how could it decide the fate of millions, forever altering the course of history? This isn't a fairy tale or a work of science fiction. This is the truth. One of the best-kept secrets, one of the greatest magic shows of World War II. A plan that even the most brilliant military minds couldn't see through until it was far too late. You're about to witness how an entire army was conjured from thin air, only to not exist. How hundreds of thousands of lives were saved not by weapons, but by an idea. This is Operation Bodyguard, 1944, the strategic deception that even Hitler fell for. And it will make you question what is truly the greatest power in any war. It was 1944. World War II was entering its darkest and most brutal chapters. The Allies understood that to end this nightmare, to liberate Europe from the shackles of Nazi Germany, a massive amphibious landing on the continent was inevitable. But this battle wasn't just about the sum of troops or the subtraction of weapons. It was a far more complex problem, a problem of the mind. For the landing to succeed, for tens of thousands of Allied soldiers not to vanish in the initial hail of bullets, they needed a weapon more potent than bombs, sharper than steel, more intricate than any destructive ordnance deception. A form of warfare where the enemy unknowingly harmed themselves. They dug their own graves with their blind confidence and false intelligence. Adolf Hitler and the German High Command were not naive. Their intelligence apparatus was incredibly sharp. They knew an Allied invasion would happen. From ceaseless reconnaissance flights to the most detailed strategic analyses, every sign pointed to an imminent attack. The question wasn't if, but a haunting, tormenting question in Hitler's every dream: where? And the answer, by all military logic, seemed etched in stone: the Pas de Calais. It was the shortest, fastest, most efficient route from England to France. It was the location every military expert pointed to as the ideal target. It was the most heavily fortified position, equipped with the most advanced weaponry of the Atlantic Wall. And most importantly, it was what Hitler wanted to believe. He believed in logic, in optimization. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, with his genius, strategic mind, and eyes that could pierce the hearts of his enemies, saw this fatal flaw. He understood that the weakness of a rigid strategic mind of a dictator obsessed with power was their predictability. The Allied plan: make the Germans believe the attack would come elsewhere, specifically Pas de Calais, not Normandy. A grand play began to unfold. History's largest chess game, with pieces that didn't exist yet powerful enough to alter the destinies of millions. Layers of deception, a web of illusions with no seams. To create a perfect veil of concealment, a curtain to shroud a real army. Operation Bodyguard was not just a single plan. It was a masterpiece of multi-layered deception woven from invisible threads so intricate that even the most seasoned shadow hunters couldn't find a single flaw. Every element, no matter how small, was meticulously calculated, placed precisely to create a perfect illusion that captivated the enemy's mind. Operation Fortitude North plus South. The grand geographical trap, manipulating the enemy's focus. The first layer of deception, the backbone of the entire operation, was Operation Fortitude. It was divided into two parts like two giant arms stretched out to keep German forces tied up as far from Normandy as possible, leading them astray in a labyrinth of false information. Fortitude North was a chilling whisper of an attack on Norway. Its purpose was simple yet effective: to keep tens of thousands of Hitler's troops and elite air force tied up in northern Europe, fearing an invasion of his northern territories. Every soldier pinned there was a soldier not present in Normandy. And Fortitude South, this was the heart, the very soul of this great deception. It concentrated all the attention, all the fears, all the calculations of the Nazi high command on the Pas de Calais. It painted an undeniable picture of a colossal army gathering. FUSAG, 1st U.S. Army Group, a name that sounded formidable, a formation that seemed invincible. But the truth, this was not an army of flesh and blood, steel and courage. It existed only on decaying paper, in meticulously forged false intelligence reports, on carefully calculated coded radio channels meant to be intercepted by the enemy, and most importantly, in the fearful minds of the German forces. FUSAG was commanded by one of the most feared Allied generals, George S. Patton. A name alone was enough to send shivers down the spine of any German commander, prompting them to frantically reinforce their defenses. The phantom presence of Patton solidified Germany's belief that a major attack on Calais was inevitable. They tied their fears to an army that didn't exist under the command of a formidable man who was actually hundreds of miles from the real battlefield, busy with other deceptive assignments. Fear had become a tool. Double-cross system, the perfect traitors, the most truthful lies whispered from within. To ensure these lies weren't just idle rumors, but were confirmed by sources Germany trusted, the Allies activated the double-cross system. This was a network of captured German spies who were transforming them into double agents, constantly feeding false information back to the German high command. What's remarkable is that these agents were absolutely trusted by Nazi Germany without a shred of doubt. They were Trojan horses within Hitler's own ranks. Among these double agents, there was a legend named Garbo, real name Juan Pujol Garcia. He was an exceptional Spanish agent, a master of deception who created his own phantom network of spies to feed intelligence to Germany. Garbo sent over 300 detailed, meticulous false reports down to the exact unit positions and movement routes of FUSAG, even including mundane complaints about training delays or supply shortages. These small, authentic details made the grand lie perfectly convincing. These reports were so convincing that even Hitler, with his inherent paranoia and obsession with conspiracies, absolutely believed Garbo's intelligence. A non-existent spy manipulated the dictator's trust, providing him with exactly what he wanted to hear, what aligned with his fears and predictions, and further cemented his belief in Pas de Calais. It was a masterful psychological manipulation where the enemy fell into their own trap due to their own stubbornness. Ghost Army, the Rubber Army, light sounds, and an untouchable presence. Finally, to create the most visual imagery to transform the lie into a perceptible entity, they had the Ghost Army, or more accurately, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops of the U.S. Army. These weren't combat soldiers. These were artists of war, masters of illusion, specializing in staging large-scale phantom troop movements, powerful enough to deceive satellites and radar. They used tanks, planes, and artillery made of rubber and canvas, inflatable monsters that seemed harmless but carried the power to destroy the enemy's confidence. They broadcast simulated sounds of rumbling tanks, the noisy clamor of troops like a flowing river of men, even the sounds of fake bomber planes on training flights. They set up inflatable encampments with lights turning on and off on fake schedules to mimic the daily activities of a real corps. They even created fake telephone lines with messages transmitted and received to jam German intelligence, forcing the enemy to waste resources deciphering meaningless chatter. When German soldiers listened to the radio, they heard internal calls about Patton's units preparing coded messages about upcoming operations. When reconnaissance planes flew overhead, they saw vast encampments stretching as far as the eye could see, long lines of tanks' artillery ready to attack. All were illusions, shimmering phantoms of a non-existent army. Yet they painted a picture so perfect, so consistent with what Hitler and the German High Command wanted to believe that they couldn't possibly doubt. Every piece of deception, from sound to light, from a seemingly trivial message to a colossal encampment, was placed perfectly to create a flawless picture of a simulated attack. A masterpiece of enchantment. When the enemy believes in what doesn't exist, and the price paid. And then the fateful night of D-Day arrived. June 6, 1944. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy warships, roaring planes bombing, creating one of the greatest and bloodiest operations in human history. Yet astonishingly, the German High Command kept nearly all its reserves and powerful armored divisions in Pas-de-Calais. They were still waiting. They had waited for an attack that never came. They were perfectly deceived, a deception that pierced them to their very core. Their belief in their own reliable intelligence, in what they wanted to see, in what they had constructed in their own minds, became a dagger in their backs, paralyzing them in the decisive moment. They squandered their most precious resources, time-elite soldiers who could have turned the tide, and invaluable strategic mobility on a phantom battle, on an illusion conjured by the Allies. This was one of their bitterest, most painful, and most humiliating moments of the entire war. With every passing minute, with every report pouring in from Normandy, shock and despair became evident on the faces of German generals. They were frozen in place, helplessly watching the historic landing without being able to react in time. The cold, stark confession of a captured German general after D-Day summarized the entire essence of Operation Bodyguard. Wir wurden getäuscht, nicht von Kugeln, sondern von Schatten. We were deceived, not by bullets, but by shadows. This was not just a confession of military failure. It was a confession of the collapse of trust, of the bankruptcy of strategic thinking. Operation Bodyguard required no weapons. It only required the manipulation and deception of perception. It killed the enemy's confidence, a silent death more devastating than any bullet. Strategic thinking. Victory in the enemy's shadow operation. Bodyguard directly killed no one. Not a single life was lost at the hands of the Phantom Army. But it saved thousands of Allied lives by minimizing the initial resistance at Normandy. Soldiers didn't have to sacrifice themselves, didn't have to bleed, because Germany had deployed hundreds of thousands of troops to wait for an attack that didn't exist. This is a powerful testament that strategy is not always about direct assault, not always about confronting with strength. Sometimes the greatest victory is achieved when you simply make the enemy face the wrong direction, when you make them busy with non-existent fears, leading them into an abyss of illusion. The power of a strategy lies not only in its ability to execute action in bravery on the battlefield, but also in its ability to manipulate the enemy's expectations, transforming their confidence into paranoia and leading them to self-inflicted defeat through their own misjudgments. It proves that psychology, perception, and belief can be a more potent, more destructive battlefield than any physical terrain. In that war, the mind became the weapon, and truth became the hostage. Lessons for today: paradoxical thinking and ghosts in the digital age. In the modern era, as information explodes like a flood, as digital noise becomes a global epidemic, the lessons from Operation Bodyguard become more chilling and valuable than ever. As the line between truth and fake news blurs, melting into one another like ink and water, and belief sometimes matters more than objective truth. We live in an unprecedentedly complex information battlefield where everything can be manipulated. The lesson from Operation Bodyguard, though seemingly paradoxical, is incredibly sharp, a guiding principle for every confrontation, large or small. If you want to win a chess game, a war, or even a debate in today's world, don't just think about what you will do. Don't just focus on preparing your own weapons and forces. Instead, make the enemy think what you will do. Sow false expectations. Build an illusion so convincing that they cannot help but believe it cannot help but fall into the trap you've laid. Because in every war, whether on the brutal battlefields of World War II or on the dynamic social media platforms of the 21st century, one truth remains: war is a gamble of belief. Operation Bodyguard, a plan that never fired a shot, never directly confronted, yet it killed the enemy's confidence, shattering their will to resist. It is history's greatest strategic phantom, forever reminding us of the invisible yet destructive power of deception. What do you think about Operation Bodyguard, a fake army that could change real history? Is this the most vivid proof that the power of the mind far surpasses any physical weapon? How many wars today are just a grand play staged to manipulate our beliefs and perceptions? Are we perhaps part of such invisible wars without even knowing it? Share your thoughts and profound feelings in the comments below. I'm eager to hear your opinions on the power of deception in history and the present and how it shapes our world. And if you're captivated by stories of cunning and secret influence in military history, don't forget to click on our next video. Be sure to subscribe to the Ghosts of Strategy channel to continue exploring the unseen strategies that affect everyone. Thank you for watching.